And now, please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, happy Easter!
Happy Easter!
That was pretty good. That was better than the 9 a.m. crowd. Well done. Maybe you're just more awake and that coffee has hit. What a glorious day! I must say that Easter is by far my favorite holiday of the year. Now, this may not come as a big surprise since I am a Christian minister, but I will say Easter was my favorite holiday since long before I was ordained. You see, when I was a kid, you had this abundance of chocolate that I got to eat in the morning, and I didn't even have to go on knocking doors to get it, Halloween style. You also have all these amazing Easter egg hunts. When I was a kid, my aunt went all out, and I mean all out, for the Easter egg hunts that we would have. I mean, there were different eggs hidden all over the yard with clues that led to other eggs, with prizes. There was an entire table full of prizes for my siblings and me, and later my cousins. It was amazing. You also have the wonderful meal that you get to go to in a little bit, especially if I'm quick. A wonderful meal, and not the stresses of Thanksgiving. And on top of all of this beautiful stuff, you have new clothes and you have pastel colors wherever you look. And you have the wonderful worship here at the Hills Church with the brass playing and the lilies and the wonderful hymns. And then, of course, there are all the folks that come to church. This warms my heart. I am a true church dork, and so I love seeing all of you in worship. As my former mentor used to say, if you could choose one day to come to church, you chose the right one. Well done. But of course, I'd love to see you back again next Sunday. Easter is wonderful. There is, however, one small problem with Easter. And it's rather inconvenient. It's the issue of what happened last week on Good Friday. I mean, talk about a way to ruin a perfectly good celebratory holiday. There is this story about the Son of God, abandoned by his friends, put on a trial on trumped-up charges, and then brutally tortured and executed. It's that one subject, like the 2016 election that you really don't want to bring up at the dinner table. No one wants to talk about it. But here's the thing about Good Friday. As much as we might not want to admit it, it does speak to some of the realities of life. Christianity is what it is. But for better or for worse, Christianity does include Good Friday. Unlike the other major faith traditions of the world, the major figure in Christianity died a horrible death at a young age. That's not true of Moses. It's not true of Muhammad. It's not true of the Buddha or Lao Tzu or Confucius. In Christianity, suffering and tragedy take center stage. It's something that we have to address. And if I were a betting man, I would guess that you actually know that reality quite well. Not about the torture and death, but the sad reality of suffering and pain. Things in your life are not all pastels and lilies and Easter egg hunts. There is a pressure in our lives, this constant pressure, particularly in a community like Wellesley, to pretend as though things are always good. They're always good in your marriage. They're always good with your kids. They're always good at work, good with our mental or physical health. You look on Instagram or Facebook and see people living these happy, idealized lives. But you know that's not reality. Life is hard. And in your darkest times, you see Jesus going to the cross, and in that, you see yourself. You feel as though you're being sacrificed to something. Jesus' experience, like Jesus' experience, your pain can often seem so lonely. You carry your cross day after day, and you wonder even if those who care about you even notice. What have you been dealing with, even this past week? Stressed out? Worried about something that's coming up at work or school? Struggling with depression? Or issues in relationships or family? Feeling guilty about something that you might have done? Are you carrying around a persistent loneliness, even though there are people around you? Then there's all the suffering that you see around us in the world that can make your pain seem even more. You know someone with mental health issues, but you just don't know what to do to help them. You look at your kids and you worry, honestly worry, about what the future holds. Has gun violence been on your mind? Or the war in Ukraine? Or the divisions in society that only seem to be getting bigger and bigger? Christianity takes suffering seriously. That's one of the core messages of the cross. Here, we name that reality and allow you to be vulnerable with your pain. Do you see the relevance of Good Friday? Why it's an important part of the story? And here's the remarkable part. In spite of all the reasons that we have to just give up or go through the motions, in spite of the legitimate reasons we have to despair at times or just descend into cynicism, we don't do that. We carry on. And we don't just carry on, we work to bring about the good. I'm assuming since you showed up this morning that you earnestly care about making the world a better place. You want to make those around you in your life better. You want to be part of the solution to things like gun violence or our broken politics. I was at the Wellesley Town meeting a couple weeks ago, and I was overjoyed to see so many people volunteering, showing up giving up with their valuable time so that they can make our community here in Wellesley a better place. And trust me, those town meetings can be a little rough. When I see our youth showing up to help serve those in need, or to show up to help with our Easter egg hunt, as they did the last week, that gives me hope. It helps me believe in the persistent power of good. There is something that compels you to seek after the right thing, the truth. Now, we may not always be right, but we try. There are people who see the reality of how bad the world can be, who carry their own pains within them, and that you choose to do the good. In his book, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis argues that it is just this persistence of the good that proves God's existence. Something compels people, it compels them outside themselves to do the right thing, even when they can't see the obvious benefit for doing so. We have this hardwired understanding of the good. There is something that calls us, lures us to love, to peace, to wholeness, to helping others. It is there, it is real, and we listen to it not just because it makes us feel good. But is that lure of God, is that presence of God enough? Is that enough to sustain us? In our reading for this morning, Mary Magdalene goes to visit the tomb of Jesus. Talk about pain and suffering. Her life has been shattered. She had to watch and have a front row seat as her great mentor and teacher was executed before her very eyes. If anyone knew the reality of evil in the world, Mary Magdalene knew that reality. She was grieving and lost. And even though it was a real threat to her life to go visit that tomb, she goes there. Now, in the other gospel account, she goes there to anoint the body with spices. But in this one, in the Gospel of John, there is no reason given. We simply don't know why she showed up. Something within her compelled her early in the morning, the first bit of the morning after the Sabbath was over, to go visit that tomb. She wanted to be with Jesus. Her love for Jesus, her gratitude for how he changed her life. Indeed, God's very presence motivated her. That same thing motivates people all the time to do good in the face of the Good Friday pain in the world. People, tired, worn-out people, you get up, get dressed, and seek to do the right thing. It's not easy, but people do it. You do it. But could Mary keep going on after what she'd been through? At a certain point, at our lowest points, we just want to give up. Then Mary sees the empty tomb. Jesus' body is gone. She panics because someone has stolen the body of her teacher. One more thing that she's got to deal with. And when a person whom she supposes to be the gardener appears, she begs him to let her know where Jesus' body lay. You can hear the desperation in her voice. Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away. There was no way that Mary could have carried the body of Jesus away by herself. But she doesn't care. She's lost in despair. Then she hears it. Her name. Mary. Suddenly she realizes that she is kneeling before Jesus. Somehow the impossible has happened. New life is there before her. Resurrection is there before her. And it changes her forever. The experience of resurrection changes lives. And it's something that we need. We desperately need it. I would bet that you have had experienced something like it in your life too. In the midst of some dark times, perhaps even your darkest, when you, like Mary, felt no reason to go on, God appeared in resurrection light. The presence of God sustains us and calls us to do the good, the everyday presence of God. But even when we're aware of God's presence, the road is not easy, and sometimes it seems impossibly hard. We need something more, something tangible to give us hope at those times. We need the risen Christ to appear in our lives. Then we hear that voice, Mary, and everything is changed. I was in Houston for Hurricane Harvey. 55 inches of rain fell over just a few days. Think about that, 55 inches of rain. All over the city, people were trapped in their homes, their lives at risk. All of their possessions were lost. And volunteers, people from all over the city, people like you and me, took their boats to go out and find people in distress while the rain still poured down. There were people in a panic, their lives in tatters, and then a boat appeared around the corner. Someone who felt the call of God within them showed up to save their life, and usually they didn't even know them. All over the city, you saw examples of heroics. One after another, angels in many forms sitting by the empty grave clothes saying, "He is risen." When my father died after a long battle with cancer, I couldn't be there by his bedside. He was in Huggins Hospital in New Hampshire, and I had to come to Cambridge to officiate a wedding. When I left that Friday afternoon for the Saturday wedding, something inside me realized that I would never see him again alive. I woke up in the morning to that inevitable phone call, and then headed to the church to officiate a wedding, full of grief. My father and I were very close, but we had a complex relationship in the years before he died. There was so much unresolved. I know that's an experience that many of you share with your own parents. So I drove back to New Hampshire in a daze, barely focusing on the road. And when I reached the house, at one of my lowest points, I found that the house was full of food. When people heard he died, they sent over plate after plate of food, so much food that we couldn't have eaten it in a week. Something about seeing that expression of love broke me wide open. It was a tangible manifestation of God's grace and new life. And it changed me in that moment and gave me hope. This past summer, I spent some of my sabbatical leave in India. The first few days, I was in Mumbai. Mumbai is a rough place for a tourist, in case you've never been there. I found in my experience people there weren't particularly friendly, and it seemed like wherever I went, what they really wanted was just to get money out of me. I had no idea who I could trust, and I was doing this all alone. It was hot, and it was crowded, and I was miserable. And then I took an early morning flight, and I mean like really early, like it took off at 3 a.m. early flight, up to Leh in Ladakh, which is in the northernmost part of India, up high in the Himalayas, at 12,500 feet above sea level. It's the center of Tibetan Buddhism in India. There, wandering through the narrow streets of the city, almost up in the clouds, I had the most profound spiritual experience. I felt this deep intimacy with the whole universe. It was almost as though God was opening me up to the true reality of life. It was blissful. I had this incredible sense of peace. The risen Christ was there with me, and it changed me. That experience continues to resonate with me ever since. In so many different contexts, people have attested to spiritual experiences that change them. There are the addicts who, when they reach rock bottom, suddenly find strength to seek new life. There are those who've had experiences, new awakenings, that save their marriages. Others attest to a sudden realization in life that changes the course of their lives from there on out. The resurrected Christ appears again and again in many different guises. What has it been for you? When were those moments, those singular moments that helped shape your life and changed it for the better? When did you hear the word Mary and have the presence of God flow over you, and you felt the presence of the risen Christ? God shows up in so many forms, and when God shows up for real, it is transformative. Some people like to argue about the nature of the resurrected Christ. Was it a spiritual body, as the Apostle Paul says? Was it a body that had flesh and form like a normal body? While I appreciate these debates, I've long thought they miss the point. There are 5 different accounts of the resurrection that we find in the New Testament, 4 in the Gospels and 1 in 1 Corinthians. Each account is different. In our reading in John for today, Mary did not initially recognize the risen Christ. And on the road to Emmaus, in the Gospel of Luke, the same thing happens with these two disciples. What was the nature of the resurrected body such that these people so close to Jesus could not recognize him initially? The resurrected body of Jesus could suddenly disappear and also walk through walls. And yet the New Testament also attests that there's some sort of corporeal nature to it. Luke claims that the resurrected Jesus ascended to heaven after 40 days, the so-called ascension. But Paul's account, which is the oldest account we have, makes no distinction between his experience of the risen Christ on the road to Damascus and those experiences on Easter morning. And Paul knew the apostles firsthand. The important point is that regardless of what form it took, the encounter with the resurrected Christ changed those who experienced it. It was a sudden and overpowering sense of the divine. According to tradition, 11 of the 12 disciples died a death of a martyr. Now, you don't change your life and commit yourself to something that leads to your own death unless it's something profound. We do not know what happened on Easter morning, but it was something miraculous. And while our experiences might not have the same intensity that theirs did, they are experiences of the resurrected Christ nonetheless. Now, here's the thing. We need to tell that story. We need to come here this morning and recall not only the ongoing presence of God in our lives that leads us to do good, but we need to recall those overpowering experiences of the divine that change us. Christians are fundamentally optimistic people. We see and name the suffering of the world. We know the reality of Good Friday. We know what evil looks like. But we also know that Good Friday is not the final word. God's response comes on Easter morning. It meets us in the empty tomb, and we hear it when that voice whispers to us, Mary. And it is just because of the persistence of Good Friday, it is because we know the reality of suffering in our lives, that we have to be equally persistent in naming the reality of Easter for ourselves and for those around us. That's how we maintain that optimism, that hope. Because I refuse to be overcome with the pessimism of the world. I refuse to believe that the divisions in our country will only lead to disaster. I refuse to believe that those who peddle hate in the name of God will have the last word. I refuse to believe that the climate crisis will inevitably doom our planet. And I refuse to believe that the only option is to send our kids to school and not know if they will come back alive. I say that with conviction because I know the presence of God is real. I have felt it, I know it. God is there leading us to a better world. It is not a straight or easy path. Good Friday happens again and again. But so does Easter morning. As you leave here this morning and go on with the great things that await you this day, carry the message of the empty tomb with you. Like Mary, ponder these things in your heart. Relive that reality. And may that refrain echo in your souls today and the days ahead, as it has for the past 2,000 years. Christ is risen. He's risen indeed.